Hi, I'm Cece. Welcome to my channel. Today we are talking about Goodwill. Before we get started on this video, I do want to make a little, not really a correction, I guess a clarification regarding my Mrs. Midwest video. If you didn't watch that one and you don't care, then you can skip ahead to the timestamp I will put on the screen. But if you did watch that, I have just a little tidbit I want to say about it. When I was talking about a few of the Instagram pages I mentioned in that video that were like European pride pages or something like that, I said something like Europe isn't a single country or culture, so if you're saying you're proud of being European, I'm just going to assume you're proud of your whiteness. And a few people in the comments kind of called me out on this and were like, that's not necessarily true, and I actually agree with them, so I kind of want to clarify just a little better what I meant to say, because I, in hindsight, did not articulate it well in that video. I think it's totally normal and fine to be proud of your heritage. I think that everyone should be allowed to celebrate their ancestry or family history or where they're from or where they grew up. A few people also pointed out that the European Union has done some really cool things together. Also that there are many people who are not from a specific European country. They have roots in several, so they might just identify as European. What I failed to articulate well and what I was trying to get at is that in the US, the idea of European pride has kind of been co-opted as a white supremacist dog whistle and is very often used by people who are actually just as a way to make their message more palatable. I think the Instagram pages I showed are actually a really great example of this. If you look at the comments on those pages, many of them are just horribly, blatantly racist, and I think it makes it pretty clear who the intended audience of those pages are. But the account itself or the person running it maintains plausible deniability by claiming that the page is just about European pride. So that's what I was getting at. I just want to say thank you also to the people who politely brought that up. I hope that clears it up a little. Okay, so Goodwill. I have been a big fan of Goodwill for a long time. I have given them a lot of my money over the years. I've always loved thrifting. I just really love the process of it. It's kind of just like a treasure hunt, but there is nothing more fun to me than like putting in earbuds, putting on a podcast, and just kind of digging through thrift store racks for a few hours. And in the US at least, Goodwill is the thrift store. I grew up in a small town and it was the only thrift store we had. Turns out Goodwill actually kind of sucks in a lot of ways. Despite branding themselves as a charity, there are actually a lot of ethical problems with the way they run their business and treat their employees a lot of the time. So on Goodwill's website, they list out their mission, their vision, and their values as follows. Our mission. Goodwill works to enhance the dignity and quality of life of individuals and families by strengthening communities, eliminating barriers to opportunity, and helping people in need reach their full potential through learning and the power of work. Every person has the opportunity to achieve his or her fullest potential and participate in and contribute to all aspects of life. Our values: respect, stewardship, ethics, learning, and innovation. This all sounds pretty great, but unfortunately, in my opinion, a lot of this kind of falls apart when you take a closer look at some of their business practices. If you saw my video on ethical fashion, some of this might be a little bit repetitive. I'm gonna hit kind of the same points, but just go a little bit more in depth in this video. So first of all, Goodwill makes it very known that they employ people with disabilities and give job opportunities to people who might otherwise struggle to find them. According to their website, 30,000 of their 113,000 employees are people with disabilities. Goodwill uses this as part of their mission and part of their marketing, that they employ disabled individuals and give them a job and a sense of purpose. This is, I hate the word problematic now because it's become so overused, but this is problematic for a couple of reasons. First of all, I personally find it kind of condescending and infantilizing. I get that a job can bring a lot of fulfillment and can be an important aspect of anyone's life, but people with disabilities lead full productive lives all the time, whether they have a job or not. And the bigger issue is that, as I mentioned in my other video, Goodwill exploits a legal loophole that allows them to pay their disabled employees less than minimum wage. So they try to act like they're doing a good and charitable thing by employing people who supposedly no one else would hire, but in reality, they are benefiting from very, very cheap labor. Goodwill has also lobbied against efforts to raise the minimum wage. I touched on this, I know, in my last video, but for this one, I did a little bit more research on what exactly this loophole is and how it is that Goodwill is able to pay its employees sub-minimum wage. So the Americans with Disabilities Act, which was passed in 1990 under the first Bush administration, supposedly protects disabled individuals from employment and pay discrimination. However, still in 2020, there is a legal loophole that is left over from the Great Depression that allows employers who hold a special certificate to pay employees with disabilities less than minimum wage, which minimum wage is already ridiculously low compared to the cost of living in most parts of the US, but that is a video for another day. This special provision is outlined in Section 14C of the Fair Labor Standards Act, which was passed in 1938. As you can imagine, it's pretty archaic by now. Basically, it says that if someone has a disability, employers who hold this certificate can pay them according to their productivity. So for example, if an able-bodied person could hang 100 pieces of clothing in an hour at a wage of $8 an hour, and someone with a disability can only hang 50 pieces of clothing in an hour, that person with a disability can legally be paid $4 an hour. There is also currently no set minimum for what these workers can be paid, which is severely fucked up. I mean, an able-bodied person can't legally have their pay docked because they have an off day or are less productive one day than they normally are. It's just blatant discrimination. I also think that if it was truly Goodwill's mission to enhance the lives of people with disabilities, part of that would be encouraging them to be self-sufficient, and a big part of that would be paying them a living wage. When confronted about this, Jim Gibbons, who is Goodwill's former president and CEO, said that Goodwill is doing a good thing because the people they are paying sub-minimum wage would otherwise have no jobs at all. Goodwill has also been known to put its disabled employees in roles that are maybe not the best fit for them. For example, Sheila Leyland and her husband Harold were some of the first employees to kind of draw attention to the way that Goodwill treats some of its disabled workers. Sheila and Harold are both blind, and they both say that they were often put to work hanging and sorting clothing. Now, this clothing was supposed to be hung, buttoned, and sorted by size. Sheila and Harold were paid less than other workers who did the same task because they obviously could not sort the clothing as quickly as a sighted person could because they weren't able to look at the clothing and see the size. Sheila also pointed out that she has a college degree and other marketable skills, and she could have been much more successful in a role as a receptionist or something like that. I mean, I feel like there are a lot of jobs that a blind person could do as efficiently as a sighted person if just some basic accommodations were made. So could this be strategic on Goodwill's part, putting their disabled employees in roles that are poorly suited for them so that they will be less efficient so that they can justify paying them less? I don't know, who's really to say? But I do think that part of an employer's responsibility, something you owe all of your employees, but especially those who have disabilities or other extra challenges, is to make the necessary accommodations and make sure that they are in a role where they can do well and thrive. Sheila said, "I want to be paid a living wage for meaningful work, and not just me. All Goodwill employees deserve the same. They call themselves leaders in providing opportunity for the disabled, but since when did opportunity look like a quarter an hour?" There are instances of Goodwill employees being paid as little as 22 cents an hour, just incredibly low wages. Harold and Sheila, I'll have to fact check what they were actually paid, but I think they were paid around 3 something and 5 something an hour. This was back in 2013. Goodwill says the reports of incredibly low wages, like less than $1 an hour, are extraneous circumstances and are not representative of what their employees are typically paid. To be fair to Goodwill, it's not true that every disabled Goodwill employee has a bad experience. Geraldine Hendricks, whose son has Down syndrome and works at Goodwill, says that she is grateful for his job there. She says that it's an important part of his social and personal life, and without it, he would likely be left at home with nothing to do all day. Some Goodwill employees also live on Social Security or disability benefits, which is how they get by on the meager wage they're paid from Goodwill. That being said, I don't see why Goodwill can't offer its employees jobs and that aspect of enrichment to their personal and social lives, and also pay them a livable wage. Goodwill also claims on its website that as of September 2020, the majority of its US stores either no longer hold or no longer make use of the certificate that allows them to pay sub-minimum wage. It also says that most of the locations that do still use that certificate are in the process of transitioning away from it. I certainly hope that's true. This is really confusing though, because they also say very clearly right here on another section of their website that they do not support phasing out or eliminating the special sub-minimum wage certificate. So Goodwill, explain. But in July of 2019, which is pretty recent, Sharon Durbin, who is the regional CEO of Land of Lincoln Goodwill in Illinois, sent out a memo to dozens of the store's disabled employees, notifying them that they would no longer be receiving a paycheck after the state raised its minimum wage. You heard that right. They were expected to continue working, but would no longer be getting a paycheck. After public outrage, she did ultimately reverse the decision, but I think this is just a really good example of how vulnerable disabled workers are to exploitation and how Goodwill has often taken advantage of that. When she was first confronted about the decision, this is what Sharon had to say. It really was not a job. It was a work component, and through it, we gave them through the grace out of our budget to pay them so they had a paycheck to go home with. Last time I checked, a work component plus a paycheck is, by definition, a job. For a company that claims to want to uplift and empower people with disabilities, that statement sure is devaluing them and their work and their contributions to the company. I'm going to read an excerpt from this Medium article that talks about this entire issue because I think this writer just puts it really well. Hiring disabled and formerly incarcerated people is not a venerable act of charity. It's corporate responsibility. Workers who suffer from systemic discrimination deserve safe workplace environments and realistic wages. Pithy rhetoric that justifies poor treatment by saying, it's the best they can do, at least we gave them jobs, is not a progressive, socially responsible move. It echoes the very same attitudes against Americans with disabilities that Goodwill claims it is working to fight. People with disabilities are not a burden, and it is a company's job to accommodate all employees' needs, fairly compensate them for their labor, and give them the same tasks and work conditions as an able-bodied coworker. So this problem is definitely not just Goodwill. They are not the only company to take advantage of this, perhaps just one of the most well-known ones. I also think it would be unfair to not point out that Goodwills differ a lot from region to region in the way that they are run. So there are some regional Goodwills that ensure that all of their employees are paid a minimum wage. But as big and as wealthy as Goodwill is, I think it's just unacceptable that the people at the top are not ensuring that all of their employees are paid a fair wage. I also mentioned in my last video that Goodwill often has workers working in unsafe conditions and has even retaliated against workers who have tried to point this out. There have been a few deaths that seem like they definitely could have been preventable if better safety measures were in place. One of the most egregious examples of this was in Sacramento, California in 2017 when 26-year-old Abraham Nicholas Garza was killed in a work accident. This is kind of gruesome and very sad, so if you don't want to hear about this, skip ahead to this point that I will put on the screen. So Abraham Garza was checking the alignment of a giant empty bin that was about to roll off of a truck and onto a stationary compactor. As he was doing this, he stuck his head in between the bin and the compactor to apparently get a closer look at the alignment. At that point, the driver released the bin and his head was crushed. He died an hour later at the hospital. Not only was Abraham tragically killed, but David Goody, another employee, witnessed the incident and was obviously traumatized from seeing this gruesome death up close. Instead of offering him any kind of support, Goodwill deemed that he was responsible for the accident and fired him. Despite the fact that over the 6 months that David Goody worked for Goodwill, there was copious documentation of him raising concerns about safety issues and the lack of safety procedures. It seemed like David Goody knew that it was just a matter of time before a tragic accident like this occurred. He tried to talk to his superiors and do what he could to prevent it, and in the end, he still ended up being blamed for it.
Absolutely preventable. 100% preventable. 200% preventable. The guy was a father, His son is now going to have to grow up without a father. As a father myself, that outrages me. And we have to do something to stop Goodwill from treating their employees this way and letting them get killed for no reason whatsoever.
Goodwill accused Goody of violating safety procedures and being responsible for the accident. Goody maintains that he has no idea what safety procedures he violated because there weren't really any in place, which was, as I mentioned, a concern that he repeatedly raised. Goodwill also challenged Goody's unemployment claim after he was fired and even attempted to run a smear campaign in order to discredit him. They dug up a 5-year-old assault charge that had been dismissed during arraignment. One of Goody's former co-workers, Dustin Underwood, called it ridiculous that Goodwill tried to blame Goody for the accident. He said, Goody was an outspoken driver on safety issues. He was on top of it and the managers didn't like him because of that. Luckily, Cal OSHA stepped into the situation and David Goody was awarded his unemployment and Goodwill was fined a little bit over $100,000 for the incident. Now, we see this all the time, multi-million-dollar companies being fined like a couple $100,000. And it's frustrating to me because while $100,000 is objectively a lot of money, to a company like Goodwill, it's not. It's barely a significant portion of their CEO's salary, let alone the company's net worth or their yearly profit. I really think for things to get better, corporations have to actually feel some pain when stuff like this happens. We can't keep fining them amounts that are peanuts to them and expecting them to change. Abraham Garza was someone's son. He was a father to a 7-year-old, and putting a price tag of $100,000 on gross negligence that cost him his life is just really messed up. And I think perhaps the worst part of all of this is that Goodwill is conducting business this way while presenting themselves as a charity and as a do-good organization. They make that a big part of their marketing, that they are helping people, they are doing good things. By shopping there, you are helping to support these good things. So even though a lot of these things may not be too far outside the realm of what a lot of corporations get away with, I really do think that Goodwill and other nonprofits should be held to a much higher standard. So that is it for me today. I hope that you guys found this interesting and informative. Let me know what you think in the comments below. I really love reading everyone's comments, and I will catch you in the next one. Bye.